The story opens with a strange creature falling from the sky. Music concert in Korea. They're like parasites looking for a host to which they can survive. Then it was shown that one of the parasites that possessed the body of a man. Instantly the man turned into a terrible monster. He also killed everyone blindly. In an instant the music concert immediately became chaotic and many victims fell. Turning to a woman named Jung Soo-in. He is the main character in this film. When he was working at the supermarket checkout, there was a man who acted as he wanted. As a result, he did not want to serve her. With emotion, the man immediately left there and did not buy the various items he took. Later that night when Soo-in is about to go home, we see the previous man following her from behind. Soo-in immediately accelerated the pace of the car. I hope it's not followed anymore. But the man immediately hit him. Not stopping there, the man also stabbed Soo-in with a knife until Soo-in was unconscious. From the front there is one parasite that directly enters Soo-in's body. Immediately the man who intended to kill Soo-in was immediately split into two. The next day when Soo-in is in the hospital, he is visited by his uncle, a policeman named Chol-min. He tells Soo-in to tell him everything that happened last night. Soo-in explains that last night she was followed by a man and stabbed in the back. But seeing the results of the examination from the doctor, there were no scars on Soo-in's body. Chol-min thinks that his nephew is just hallucinating. Soo-in however insists that he has been stabbed and bleeds profusely. When he does not believe, Soo-in orders his uncle to interrogate the culprit. But Chol-min also said that the culprit was also killed on the spot. This makes Chol-min feel strange about what really happened. Turning to the middle of the city is shown a boss of one of the gangs approaching a bar. As he entered one of the rooms came another man named Kong Wo, who intended to kill him on orders from his gang leader. Unfortunately he did not succeed in killing him. To see his target who called his men, Kong Wo immediately ran away from there. He then went straight to his brother's house because he thought he would become a fugitive from his enemy's gang. When he arrived home from his brother, Kang Wo also felt awkward with his brother's very strange attitude. He was also looking for his sister who was not in his room. While in his sister's room, Kang Wo even finds a strange brochure about an invitation to go to a church called Sijin. Back to Soo-in. After being discharged from the hospital, she tried to walk to relieve her trauma. When he got on the bus, his ears started ringing for no reason. There was a strange man staring at him. Somewhere a woman is shown who is with a man in an empty building. The man who was with the woman was shocked after seeing the woman who was with him suddenly turn into a monster. Fortunately, the army came to his rescue. The military forces immediately shot at all the monsters in front of them. The monsters also fought until many victims fell. In the front yard, one of the monsters detects a classmate tied to a chair. When he wanted to save her, came the leader of the military forces named Mrs. Choi, who immediately shot at the monster. The monster also managed to escape. Once the conditions were safe, they searched the entire room and saw a sign that was likely a symbol of the Parasyte organization. Back to Soo-in, when he got off the bus, the man who saw him before followed him because he was afraid. He ran away from there. When pressed, another woman, or Kong Wo's sister, who was with the man, came. They both turned into strange monsters. The monster then says that Soo-in is a parasite just like them. The parasite in Soo-in's body immediately responds and turns Soo-in's body into a monster. After that, the two parasites gave him a brochure and told Soo-in to come to a church. Then the two parasites leave there. It turned out that Kong Wo was also there and had seen everything. The parasite that was in Soo-in's body immediately caught him and threatened to kill him. Kong Wo apologizes and reasons that he accidentally followed his brother because of his strange behavior. The parasite then releases Kong Wo on the condition that he tells Soo-in everything. Because when Soo-in turns into a monster he will be unconscious. When Soo-in wakes up, Kong Wo explains everything to Soo-in. But Soo-in doesn't believe him and assumes that Kong Wo is drunk. Upon arriving home, Soo-in writes a message in her book. Is it true that there are parasites that possess it? When he awoke from his sleep, there was another inscription in his book that said, yes. And what the man explained earlier is true. Soo-in was surprised. At the police station, Chol Min and his partner Won Sok are surprised by the number of military personnel doing physical examinations. Then the entire police force was gathered in a room. Choi's mother then explains that she is from a military team called Grey. Their task is to exterminate the parasitic races that exist on Earth. Choi's mother then shows him a video at a music concert and one of the corpses of the monsters that spread at this time. He also explained that they have not yet spread this phenomenon to the people in order to prevent mass panic. The Grey team's goal is to get to the central police station because they need help killing the parasites. A police officer then asked Choi's mother how she could detect the presence of a parasite. Choi's mother then shows the prisoner what she names a fellow parasitic hunting dog. Their ears will ring as a form of signal response. And this hunting dog will press a button in his hand when he feels his people around him. Another policeman also asked about how to kill these parasites. Choi's mother also explained that it is enough to shoot him several times or shoot him in the heart because this parasite will not be able to survive when its host dies. Turn to Kong Wo. He is shown returning to the city to sell his watch because he is in desperate need of money. Then he went to a cell phone shop to fix his phone. In addition, he also went to a motorcycle shop to buy one of the motorcycles. A man in a mobile phone shop tells Kang Wo that a group of people have been looking for him for days. Sure enough, a few moments later came the gang forces of his enemy who turned out to be called by the owner of a motorcycle shop. Fighting is also inevitable. However, due to his good fighting experience, Kang Wo was able to escape from there. Although some gang members were still chasing him, he managed to escape. Feeling insecure, Kang Wo calls his gang friend to ask him for help. Kang Wo's best friend tells him to go to a gas station in the middle of the night. Turning to the police station, Miss Choi also asked for all the investigation files lately, which felt awkward. They then gave all the files to Mrs. Choi. Meanwhile, when Soo-in was working, his manager came who suddenly wanted to talk to him. Soo-in then asks why his uncle suddenly wants to see him. His uncle reasoned that he wanted to make sure if his nephew was okay. But Chol Min's goal isn't really that. He has a hunch that Soo-in has been infected by a spreading parasite. But he didn't dare ask about it. After a long conversation, Chol Min didn't find anything strange about Soo-in. Then he gave the hanger to his nephew and left. In the evening, Soo-in goes to a church just like the one she received in the brochure. There is also Kang Wo secretly also come to the church, because he was suspicious of the brochure in his sister's room. In the church were shown dozens of people who were parasites. They were all led by one parasite that possessed the body of a priest. Meanwhile, Kang Wo, who saw a strange warehouse, he also intends to enter the warehouse. Find out what the warehouse is. When entering it, there is one of the parasites there. He was also surprised by the number of corpses that had been cut there. It was suspected that the corpses of the corpses were the food of parasitic monsters. One of the bodies there, Kang Wo also saw the body of his sister who was also there. At once he immediately felt angry and killed one of the parasites on guard. After that he went straight from there. Parasites can sense when their friends are in danger. Then the leader of the parasites ordered his people to catch the intruder who was stalking them. While leaving, Soo-in accidentally drops her house key. Meanwhile, Kang Wo, who escaped, he was instead confronted by his enemy gang. Kang Wo tries to warn them to leave immediately, but they don't care. Before long came some parasites that instantly killed them all. Kang Wo runs away and meets Soo-in and asks him to go to the gas station. There was his friend waiting for him. In a panic, Kang Wo immediately invited his best friend to leave immediately. In the middle of the journey, his friend even intends to kill him for no reason. He says that Kang Wo is no longer needed in the gang. Shortly after that, one of the parasites appeared that immediately attacked them. Soo-in immediately turns into a monster and immediately fights the parasite that attacked him. With his parasitic ability of Soo-in also managed to win the fight. While Kang Wo is in danger, he is saved by Soo-in's parasite. The story then flashbacks to the past. When the plague of this parasite had just spread, it was when Mrs. Choi shopping at the supermarket. Her husband was infected by one of the parasites and then attacked everyone. Look at that. Mrs. Choi immediately makes a plan to lure the parasite so as not to hurt people again. Fortunately, the parasite was successfully secured and now Mrs. Choi uses it to hunt down other parasites. Returning to Soo-in, after what happened last night he was accompanied by Kang-woo for a while. Kang-woo then had the idea to name Soo-in's parasite Heidi. This is to make it easier for him when he interacts with her. Kang-woo then had a plan to report the headquarters of the parasites in the church earlier. Soo-in agreed, and said that he had an uncle at the police station. Then they both called Chol Minimum under a pseudonym. This is so that they do not suspect why they can find out the headquarters of the parasites. After getting the information, Chol Min tells Won-sok and also Mrs. Choi about the information he got. Mrs. Choi then asked about how she got the information. Chol Min replies that someone called him but he didn't say his name. To confirm the truth, Mrs. Choi sends the entire Grey team to inspect Sijin Church, rumored to be the headquarters of the parasites. When I got there, no one was found. In a room, Chol Min finds Soo-in's keys and a hanger given to him. This immediately made him feel suspicious, whether his nephew was one of the parasites. Unknowingly, Chol Min's behavior has also been watched by Mrs. Choi, because he was suspicious of Soo-in after reading the case. After the investigation was completed, the entire army was told to retreat by Mrs. Choi. Then they were ordered to report all the findings they got. One of the soldiers reported that they found 500 pieces of human bodies in one of the warehouses. Moments later Won-sok suddenly says goodbye to Chol Min, arguing that he's going to go home. Unexpectedly Won-sok even went somewhere and met the parasites there. It turns out that Won-sok is working with parasites. The parasites who managed to escape earlier also thanks to the help of Won-sok. In addition, the parasite priest asks Won-sok for help in killing Mrs. Choi's hunting dog, who is also her husband, because parasites are very difficult for them to act. Returning to Soo-in, he is called by his uncle who invites him to meet. Kang-woo feels that his uncle knows everything, but he didn't want to feel bad because he was the only family he had at the moment. When going to a meeting, Mrs. Choi secretly follows Chol Min from behind. This meeting took place in an abandoned amusement park. There Chol Min asks his nephew if he's a parasite. Soo-in answered, yes, but it was not as what was imagined. When he wanted to explain further came Mrs. Choi who immediately did the shooting. In a hurry, Soo-in runs away with Kang-woo. By entering the haunted house, there they both were even pushed because of the military forces that began to arrive. Heidi or parasites in Soo-in's body immediately told Kang-woo to save himself, while he will buy time. In the middle of his escape Kang-woo accidentally sees Won-sok who killed the parasite or Mrs. Choi's husband. But Kang-woo prefers to continue his escape because he does not want to be caught by the police. Returning to Soo-in, he was surrounded by military forces. Chol Min tries to protect her and says that she is not a parasite. But Mrs. Choi insists on saying that Soo-in is a parasite. When Mrs. Choi returned to her car, she was shocked to see her husband dead. He wondered who killed him. At the police headquarters, the results of Soo-in's examination also look strange, because there is nothing suspicious. Supposedly if he was a parasite then the results of the scan showed the state of his brain is empty. This is also protested by Chol Min, so that they release his nephew. But Mrs. Choi refused. He's planning on doing some more research. Maybe there's something they don't know about parasites. In the subconscious, Soo-in meets Heidi, who explains that she has cut off Soo-in's consciousness for a while. When he wakes up, the electric shock immediately hurts him. Turning to Kang-woo, he didn't know where else to go because he was afraid that the police were still hunting him. As he is about to board a bus, Chol Min arrives, who immediately catches him. Chol Min says that he only needs her information regarding Soo-in. Kang-woo then tells everyone that Soo-in is very different from the other parasites. He is a typical good parasite. Kang-woo also tells him that he saw Won-sok who killed Mrs. Choi's husband. After explaining, Chol Min gives Kang-woo the choice to go free or save Soo-in, who is now in danger. Kang-woo immediately chose to leave. Chol Min immediately shouted and said if it was a reply from him after Soo-in saved him. Chol Min also says that you don't know how to return the favor. When his friends betray him he even believes it. But when Soo-in helps her, she leaves him. Hearing that speech, Kang-woo discourages his intention to leave there and chooses to save Soo-in. Chol-min reveals his plan to save Soo-in. Kang-woo's first step should be to enter the dressing room of the military forces first. To wear military costumes, there he had to deal with one of the guards. After succeeding, he was ordered to get into the container truck or where Soo-in was. Then he had to find a device that locked Soo-in's head. Unfortunately, when the last move or release of Soo-in will succeed, Mrs. Choi instead perform an operation to move Soo-in to the central Merkaz. The operation is controlled by dozens of special forces. By the watchful eye when an obstacle occurs later. Sure enough, Mrs. Choi's guess turned out to be correct. When entering the toll road, there are dozens of parasites that directly attack them. One by one, the army began to fall. Realizing that the parasite wants to free Soo-in, Mrs. Choi tries her best to keep the parasites from touching Soo-in. Then Kang-woo began to go down the street to see what happened. After that, he takes Mrs. Choi's tool, which is a tool to free Soo-in. When Soo-in is released, he regains consciousness. Then Kang-woo immediately took him to get away from there. In the middle of the escape, Chol-min is seen with Won-sok chasing them. In a panic, Kang-woo immediately increased the speed of his car so that they would not be caught. But without them expecting, Won-sok even turned the direction of his car somewhere. At the same time, Soo-in's ears suddenly ringing, which indicates that there are evil parasites there. Feeling that his uncle was in danger, he told Kang-woo to turn around and follow Won-sok's direction. Sure enough, after Soo-in arrives somewhere, he sees his uncle being beheaded by one of the parasite priests, who then takes Chol-min's body. Furious to see her uncle killed in front of her, Soo-in immediately takes Heidi out and fight with parasites. Kang-woo tells Soo-in to get in the car, because from a distance military cars were seen heading towards them. Now they both don't know where to go. Kang-woo then called his old friend who was very close to him. He reasoned that he wanted to stay at home for a while. At the police station, Mrs. Choi meets with her superiors to discuss parasites. One of his superiors gave him 3 days to eradicate the parasites. There will be an annual festival held. Back to Kang-woo, when he arrived at his friend's house, it turned out that his friend had still not returned from work. Soo-in then says that she is worried about the police officers because there is an undercover parasite among them. Kang-woo tells Soo-in to stay calm. The police must realize that, especially Mrs. Choi. At the police station, the parasite, disguised as Soo-in's uncle, suddenly gives a report that he got information about the headquarters from the parasites. This makes Mrs. Choi feel confused about how she got the information. In the middle of the night, Mrs. Choi gets a call from Soo-in informing her that there are 2 parasites disguised as police officers. Mrs. Choi feels incredulous at Soo-in's words. Then to prove it, Soo-in invites Mrs. Choi to meet at a cafe. When we met, Mrs. Choi asked who the parasite was. Soo-in says that his uncle and Won-sok are parasites. From the back came Mrs. Choi's troops, who even intended to arrest Soo-in. Soo-in hurried away from there. Luckily, Kang-woo arrives just in time to drive his friend's car. On the way, Kang-woo scolds Soo-in for acting like he didn't want to tell her. When she returns home, Heidi tells Kang-woo that she must tell Soo-in not to get involved in any more dangerous situations in 3 hours, because he has to rest completely because he uses Soo-in's body too often. Moments later, Kang-woo gets a call from his friend who was infected by a parasite that infested the body of his older brother. Kang-woo is told to go home and give Soo-in or he will never see his friend again. Upon arrival, the parasite tells Soo-in that he is a variant parasite that does not deserve to live. Just as Soo-in is about to be attacked comes Kang-woo, who throws a gas canister at the parasite. Then Kang-woo invites them all to leave immediately. Unexpectedly, Kang-woo's friend even sacrificed his life so that Soo-in and Kang-woo could escape. Kang-woo continues to shed tears because he is the only good friend she has. At the police station, Mrs. Choi begins to suspect the 2 policemen Soo-in told her about earlier. Before starting a large-scale operation to slaughter the parasites, Mrs. Choi gets a call from Kang-woo asking about what the police are doing. Mrs. Choi explains that they will raid the headquarters of the parasites according to information from Chol Minimum, hearing that Kang-woo also said that it was a trap. because Chol Min is no longer human. But when the attack is carried out, it is true that all parasites are gathering there. I don't know what happened to the parasite that was inside Chol Min's body even attacked his own people. The incident was witnessed by a parasite that infested the body of Kang Guo's brother. Seeing that, Kang Guo concluded that the purpose of the parasites was not to set traps, but rather to convince the police that the parasites had been eradicated. The annual festival continues. That's when the parasite will target the mayor's body to control humans. Instantly the story is made a flashback to Wanzuk's past. When the parasite outbreak has just spread, he also gets news from the community that a priest who leads the Sajin church has not been seen lately. When Wansuk checks into his house, he sees that the priest's wife has died. In addition, the priest he knew even turned into a monster and threatened to kill him. It was from that moment that the parasite gave Wansuk a deal so that he would help him. In return he will get everything he wants. At the police station, Chol Min gives a report that there are two suspects, namely Su In and Kang Guo's brother, who are suspected parasites. People were ordered to report to the police when they saw it. Seeing Chol Min's very strange behavior, Mrs. Choi tries to ask him if he still remembers about an object he found secretly in the Sajin church. Chol Min is silent. Wansuk then distracts and reasons if they're in need. Back to Su In. Kang Guo's sister also invited him to meet and wanted to talk about something. When he met the parasite in Kang Guo's brother's body, he said that the leader of the parasite was even more despicable by killing his own people. He needs help to kill the parasites that infest Chol Min's body. Heidi accepted it. After making a deal, Heidi also invites parasites in the body of Kang Guo's sister to cooperate. It was late at night when Mrs. Choi was going to a place because of a report about another parasite. Heidi immediately contacted him and said that she knew all the plans of the parasite disguised as a policeman. They convinced the military team that an annual festival could be held. Then the parasite will aim for the head of the leader of the city. Hearing this, Mrs. Choi immediately turned around and invited her men to go to the annual festival. Sure enough, at the annual Parasite Festival, Chol Min attacks by killing everyone and intends to target the head of the city leader. When Heidi and her friend are about to intervene, Mrs. Choi comes in their way. Heidi told her parasite friend to go first, and then there was a fight between Heidi and Mrs. Choi. When Mrs. Choi was helpless, Heidi said that she did not want to kill humans. So he told Mrs. Choi not to attack him again. In an empty building, when the leader of the city is about to be attacked by the parasite Chol Min, Kang Guo's older brother comes to his rescue. In the end there was a fight between them that was quite fierce. Unfortunately, Kang Guo's brother didn't win the fight. Because the parasites need a host to survive, the parasite in Chol Min's body turns into Wansuk. Unexpectedly, Wanzam was even betrayed by a parasite he believed in. When Kang Guo was rescuing the mayor to escape, come before parasites who intend to attack him. When you're desperate, it was Heidi who saved him. Heidi tells Kang Guo to save the mayor first. In the middle of the fight, Mrs. Choi appears, who intends to help her. In the end, they both managed to kill the parasite from Wanzuk's body. Heidi then thanked Mrs. Choi for helping her. Now Mrs. Choi begins to understand that parasites, just like humans, cannot be classified as criminals. A few months later, Kang Guo and Su In have been living freely and peacefully. No further signs of parasites have appeared on its territory. Meanwhile, at the police station, Mrs. Choi is surprised by the arrival of a man from Japan named Shinichi Izumi. He claims to be a journalist who knows the existence of the parasites. And the movie ends.